Welcome to the Security Weekly News wrap-up for the week of 23 January 2022, episode 182. Vultur, QNAP, Trickbot, Apple, pkexec, Space Force, and more on the Security Weekly News wrap-up show.
This is Security Weekly, for security professionals, by security professionals.
We interrupt our program to bring you this important message.
It's the show that keeps you up to date on the latest security news twice a week. Your trusted source for accurate security information and expert analysis. It's time for Security Weekly News. Monitoring and maintaining compliance is a never-ending struggle with a high price of failure. FIREMON helps customers meet complex and varying compliance requirements. FIREMON has fully customizable reporting, analytics, assessments, and dashboards to meet the compliance needs of any organization. With FIREMON, compliance reports take a tenth of the time, and real-time continuous compliance eliminates the anxiety and headaches of audit preparation. Improve security outcomes by improving security operations with FIREMON. Visit securityweekly.com/FIREMON to learn more. Every 11 seconds, there's a new ransomware attack. Oil pipelines, universities, corporations, all paying millions of dollars. Barracuda says, don't pay the ransom. Before a ransomware attack occurs, train your teams to recognize an attack and use anti-phishing technology. Protect your applications, and they can't get onto your network. Simple backup and restore solutions quickly recover your data without paying the ransom. Build your ransomware protection plan now by visiting securityweekly.com/Barracuda. That's securityweekly.com/Barracuda.
All right, I'm Doug White, and this is the Security Weekly News wrap-up show. This week on Application Security Weekly number 181, music's still playing. Okay, the music's still playing. Anyway, on Application Security Weekly number 181, Adrian, John, and Mike had Himanshu Dwivedi, who's the CEO at Data Theorem, on the first segment. Himanshu talked about one of the many methods that are used to target shadow apps and exfiltrate lots of data, of course, using the API for that purpose. Very popular subject. I think these kind of attacks are somewhat related to supply chain type attacks, because anytime I see that there's an API, even if it's a shadow API, all this stuff's sort of buried here and there, it all starts to sound like supply chain stuff to me. In the second segment, Adrian and Mike did news stories. Safari fixes a privacy lean in IndexedDB. Integer arithmetic flaw leads to Linux kernel bug. A look back on Zoom security. SSRF from a URL allows list bypass. A security engineering course and lectures. 25 years of HTTP/1.1 and other stories. On Business Security Weekly number 247, Ben, Jason, and Matt had Mark Fernandez, the Global Chief Technology Officer at CyberRes, on the show. Mark was on to talk about how to apply cyber to enterprise resiliency. And obviously those things are heavily related. And, people have spent years talking about resiliency and disruption and disaster and all this kind of stuff. And they're starting to realize that security is a critical component of that from the cyber perspective. I mean, you've always seen a bank saying we got to have guards, but a lot of times they were real struggles. Believe me, I've been in those meetings to try to get them to also consider digital as a part of that threat to the resiliency. And then they went on and talked about the Galaxy platform, which is a tool that aligns threats to prioritize risk activities. So an interesting segment. In the second segment, the news, they had mastering art and science is imperative for CISOs to be successful. 7 ways to ensure successful cross-team security initiatives. 2 key cybersecurity lawmakers will not seek re-election, including our very good friend, Jim Langevin. Thanks for all your service, Jim, and we hope we'll see you around soon. And other stories. On Enterprise Security Weekly 258, Adrian, Katie, and Bill had Jamie Moles, the Senior Technical Marketing Manager at ExtraHop, on the show. Jamie was on to talk about the Log4Shell 0 day and how you can determine if you're in the clear. Log4Shell obviously being a really big deal, and Log4j and all that stuff that has gone on. So if you're still wondering, are you subject to this, and you may well be, that segment did have a live demo of the Log4Shell vulnerability in a lab environment. So if you want to watch somebody actually execute that, that's a pretty cool segment. In the second segment, they had the news. In their third segment, Bikash Barai, the co-founder and CEO at FireCompass, joined the show to talk about continuous security and how is red teaming getting automated and moving toward continuous security. So if you watched Paul's Security Weekly this week, you saw Jimmy from DVD.com on there talking about automated red teaming and all these kind of things that allow us to improve our security posture. So definitely you can check that out. On Security Weekly News number 181, Jason Wood talked about how the United Kingdom government was opening a discussion about a register/licensing type thing, a la medical licensing for British InfoSec professionals. I had a lot of comments on that show, and I'm going to give some more comments about that today in a few minutes. On Paul's Security Weekly number 725, well, first up was Jimmy Sanders, who, as I said, the head of security at DVD.com. If you don't know, that's the wing of Netflix that manages all the shipping of DVDs and all that stuff that goes on. It was a bit overwhelming to talk with Jimmy since he's in charge of, it's like, wow. But he's Jimmy's a super nice guy, and we had a really fun time talking with him. I hope we get to see him in person sometime in the future, and all of you as well. We hope that eventually we'll have another con, and we can all get together and we can sign autographs and give away shirts and all that fun stuff that we used to get to do all the time. We did have a lot of Q&A about how to stay ahead of risks and threats. I disagreed with Josh's disagreement, and we all agreed to disagree or something like that, but it was fun. On the second segment, Paul and Tyler explained how to set up Ubiquiti Wi-Fi management systems. If you're interested in this product, which you may be, it's definitely worth your time to check out that segment. They had some tips, they had some articles and how-tos, a lot of fun. And in the third segment, of course, the security news. So my threat of the week, then, is going to be Overreach. Or maybe Underreach. I don't know. It's too much or not enough. I don't know. But back on Tuesday, Jason was talking about the story from the United Kingdom where they were talking about creating some sort of licensure similar to what they do for doctors and attorneys and accountants and all those kind of things. And that's something near and dear to my heart. Because I had really been involved in this, and I had a lot of engagement in this very similar conversation probably back, I was going on probably 15 years ago now. But what happened was some private detective groups in some, not all states, my state, Colorado, did not have a private detective licensing board, but a lot of states did. And I didn't know anything about this realm of the world at all. And all of a sudden, some private detective boards got the idea, and they had seen declining membership and declining influence because a lot of the stuff private detectives had done in the past, people could kind of do themselves on the internet, like just skip tracing people and things like that. But private detectives were looking to expand their control, and they started trying to take over digital forensics. And I initially, okay, fine. They want to license people. That's no problem. But what started happening was I was seeing these licensing requirements, and I'm heavily involved in digital forensics and certification of people. I work for the ISFCE, and I work for the ASCLD and all this kind of stuff. And they're passing licensing requirements, and one of the first states to do it was Texas, who's always about freedom until they're not. Texas is always like, we're all about freedom, but we want to ban books, or we want to, require these licensure things and I'm like, what? I thought you could strap on a gun and go downtown in Texas, but oh no. And the licensing requirements had nothing to do with digital forensics, but they were being applied to digital forensicators. And I got worried about it, and I started investigating this, and I went out and I got a PI license in Rhode Island since I didn't know, was I suddenly not going to be able to do digital forensics anywhere because I was not a licensed private investigator? And all that, of course, led to the very famous or infamous Leonardo paper, of which I'm a co-author, which assesses the state of all these laws from state to state. And we've been writing and rewriting that paper for years and years. And if you want to read one of the Leonardo papers, you can read them. And there's a new one that's going to come out real soon. I thought it may be out already. That comes out in the Journal of Digital Forensic Security and Law. So you can check that out online if you're interested in those papers. But we just put that update through, and hopefully it'll be on their site if it's not already shortly. But the point of me bringing all that up was that what I found on this when we were looking at it was that the rules varied wildly from state to state. And some of the rules had been written in like the 1930s, and they had never been updated at all. And there were states like Texas that suddenly required 10,000 hours of PI training in order to do digital forensics. I think it was 10,000 hours. I literally think it was some number like that. It was just like crazy large number. Or Massachusetts, which is obviously important to me because I actually did a lot of forensics cases in Massachusetts, and Massachusetts, to be a PI, required that you had all this law enforcement experience. So the actual state code said that you had to have certain kinds of law enforcement experience to be a private investigator in Massachusetts. Now, very few digital forensics people actually had this kind of law enforcement experience because they were techie people. And all of a sudden Massachusetts came out and they said, hey, look, you're going to have a PI. So I was having to hire PIs to sit in their car while I did digital forensics cases in Massachusetts. And so this new thing, then back to the point, the new thing of cybersecurity people having to be licensed is, I think, an equal challenge. Now, maybe in England and in the United Kingdom, they would be able to, I don't know. I mean, there seems to be a lot of contentious pieces to the United Kingdom, and trying to get all those pieces to agree, I don't know. And in the United States, there's 50 separate states and some territories that all have their own state laws that are not federal. And a lot of people immediately started saying, well, why don't we just have federal licensing? You know, they're going to give you some kind of federal license issued by the United States government. There is nothing federally licensed because nobody can agree on it. I mean, doctors, lawyers, accountants, all those people are licensed, but they're licensed by states, just like PIs. So my PI license is for the state of Rhode Island. It's not valid in the state of Texas. And there's not a lot of, agreements on this by any of these different states. So a doctor who's licensed to practice, and I did not look this up to see if it's valid, so if they have reciprocal agreements, sorry, but a doctor licensed to practice in Illinois may not be able to just move to Rhode Island and set up shop. They may have to actually take the medical boards again. It's kind of like your driver's license. Like you move to some states, and they say, oh, turn in your old driver's license, turn in your New York driver's license, and we'll give you a Michigan driver's license. Some states, they say, turn in your New York license, and you take a test to get a license, and on and on. And same thing with doctors and lawyers and all these other people. Now, there are reciprocal agreements in some states, but not, it's not consistent. My wife still has a CPA license from another state, and than where we live now, because the requirements there were so much more stringent that she wanted to maintain her license in that state. It's just more valuable to her. So what does all that mean to us? Well, do you think that the state legislatures could figure out fair rules and requirements, or would it just get handed off to some board that is either formed on the spot or that it's some existing board like the PI board? And in North Carolina, the PI board was very powerful. It had a lot of lobbying dollars, and they had secret meetings and so forth. I mean, what is this board going to do? Would they suddenly require that you have a cybersecurity degree? I mean, I could hope that they would require that, but you might not have that degree. Or what if they allow you to have a degree in MIS, or that's what the requirement is, and they say, oh, well, we only take an MIS degree. And if you don't know anything about what an MIS degree is, well, it might mean you've studied spreadsheeting. It could mean you have a management degree, or it could be some kind of technical thing, because those degree terms don't mean anything. I mean, any school can set up any kind of degree they want, and they can call it whatever they want, and they often do. I mean, would they accept a computer science degree? And would that qualify you to do a pen test in Oregon? I don't know. It probably wouldn't. Even if the computer science department says it has some cybersecurity components to it, does it actually teach you how to do pen tests in compliance with the law? So would you have to take a test? What would the test be? And, all that is then the root of the licensing problem. I mean, I kind of like the idea when I first heard it because you know what barriers to entry do, right? They raise salaries. That's why, lawyers make more money than people that aren't lawyers. But it also mean, it may mean there's less idiots out there running around saying that they're pen testers and saying that they know what they're doing and they're not, and they don't really have the training and skills. So you've at least done some of that because you have to go through a process. But what would the process be? And that was what I learned. Do you have to have an OSCP to do pen tests, or is a CEH enough? And I know some of you are screaming at the screen right now saying, oh, come on. But these boards did all kinds of wacky stuff with PI licensing. They didn't often even consider what they were doing. They just wanted your money, and they weren't going to allow you to be certified, and they didn't even think it through or even have anybody at the board meeting who knew anything about the subject. And it really worries me a lot. I mean, what if some third-party board gets hold of it and they decide to put all kinds of silly requirements in place that don't have anything to do with cybersecurity, like, say, you have to have 5 years of experience as a sergeant in law enforcement, or you have to be a higher experience in a police organization? I could see somebody selling that to a state legislature and saying, we can't have just any, Yahoo running around doing these pen tests. They ought to have to have been a police officer. Okay, well, that would be a real problem for a lot of us. And it's going to be totally ridiculous when I can do a pen test in Rhode Island but not in Massachusetts. But that's the way digital forensics is handled. So would you have to be licensed in California if you live in Michigan, but you work remotely in Europe for a company based in San Francisco? I don't know. And these are all questions that we were asking that PI board in North Carolina, and they basically kicked us out of the room. At some point, the chair of the board, we kept asking questions. We were supposed to be allocated time to speak. They did let one of the people we had brought speak. And then they said, we're going to ask that everybody else here, and this wasn't an unfair question. They said, we need you to show a North Carolina driver's license or leave. And basically what he said was, we're not interested in a bunch of yahoos coming to our state and telling us what to do. And they kicked us out, because they didn't want to hear that, any feedback except that, their rules were good. And I tell you, it's a dangerous game. Now, don't get me wrong. I'm all for professional validation of people in our industry. And, we have certs for that. But again, what certs? I mean, a CISSP is not the same thing as a CCNA, and none of that has anything to do with a CCE. I have all three of those certifications, but they aren't the same, and none of them have anything to do with pen testing. So would that get me a license in Arizona? I don't know. Probably depends on who's on the board and what the state legislature is interested in. From my research on those state laws, it's going to be all over the place if somebody tried to do it. A lot of it was just stupid requirements that don't even apply to digital forensics. And, I mean, digital forensics is far more defined than cybersecurity. So here's the threat, finally. I know that was a rant, but I couldn't help myself. Keep an eye on this. This is my point. You need to keep an eye on this, because if your state starts trying to pass these things, guess how they'll do it? There will be an announcement in a state register that there is a committee hearing at the state legislature. They will not put that on the evening news. They won't come and tell you about it. They will just have a hearing, and the people that are interested in it will go to the hearing and tell them what they want to tell them. And if you're not involved in it, there is just no telling what's going to happen. And all of a sudden, there'll be a law in the books, and somebody will be telling you, oh, yeah, you can't do pen tests in the state of Michigan because we passed a law that says you have to have this, and this. And, oh, you also have to be a CISSP, and you have to have a master's degree in criminal justice or some wacky thing. And you don't have those things. And all of a sudden, they're going, well, sorry, you won't be able to do your job here. So, keep an eye on it. And if you don't know how to do that, well, start finding out, because it's important that you see these things and get your 2 cents in your state before they end up passing a law. Now, there's nothing imminent that I've seen, but if the UK passes this, it could well start being that way. And now the news. Sorry, long rant. An app on the Google Play Store called 2FA Authenticator was hosted for 2 weeks and downloaded more than 10,000 times. The app, which is a valid authenticator apparently, and it was approved by Google Play, but is actually loaded with Vultur, which is a malware that steals financial information. Pratio advised that if you had installed this app, you should probably uninstall it immediately, but you would still be at risk from all sorts of login attacks on your bank accounts. Vultur was considered pretty groundbreaking back in March when Threat Fabric first found it. This was last year, and it was supposedly the first app that had key logging and screen recording as a primary tactic targeting banking data, and that they did not use traditional approaches to this, which are called overlay attacks, but they simply recorded what was on the screen rather than trying to develop that HTML overlay type attack. When it's installed, it asks for permission to do things beyond what was listed on its Google Play application, and it did things like accessing your location data. It could disable the device lock and password security. It could download third-party apps and take over control of your device completely using permissions that were granted when you did the original install. It also was setting the system alert window permission, which means that it could theoretically change other mobile applications' interface settings to either keep you from getting into them and or causing them to run. You would know that it was actually manipulating those things because the pop-up was disabled. It was available in the Play Store for 15 days. So, if you did download that, you probably need to do something about it right away. You probably got these warnings already, but you may want to reiterate to your users that shipping scams are being used heavily to push Trickbot and other droppers, primarily Trickbot, though. The scams, and I've gotten about a dozen of these things in the last month, they basically say that you either have a package from DHL or U.S. Postal Service and you get an email with this information, and some of them say they need more information. Some of them have attachments that say, here's an invoice. I have one where the attachment says it's an invoice for a package that's being held, and then I also got one that said there was a confirmation of delivery on a package, which obviously I didn't get, and had like a monetary amount that said like this package worth $1,200 has been delivered, and obviously it wasn't, so that you're supposed to click there to see where it was delivered. But the scam is so common now that Checkpoint, who has a list of brands that are commonly faked, bumped Microsoft off the #1 spot and replaced it with DHL. So that's how common these scams are, that they're actually superseding things like Microsoft. So look, they're going to keep shifting this stuff around because it works, but we all have to ensure that our people know that when we get these types of emails, they're going to need to report them and be very careful before they just click on that link or click on that attachment. They're very sneaky, and most of us have things on order. So, we don't always know who the shipping agent is. And I almost clicked one because I had ordered some cognac from France, and I got one that said DHL, and it said that I had a package which was being held, and there was an attachment for information, and yes, it was a malware. But it is a good way to add to your collection of malware if you like to collect such things. And speaking of Trickbot, apparently Trickbot has been updated and revised to include mechanisms which prevent detection and reverse engineering, or at least try to do that as a part of a major update to the Trickbot malware. Trickbot now is apparently using server-side injections instead of loading the packages directly on infected machines. It also uses HTTPS for the command and control communication, and of course that means that you can't easily read these data streams, and it also of course blocks certificate errors that may be being reported. At least it keeps it from being easy to detect. But the third trick that they've added that made it kind of interesting too was this new trick. Basically what happens is they crash the window that you're trying to examine this file with if you set off this anti-debugging script that they've included. This was triggered by what is called code beautification, and code beautifying is where you reformat code to try to make it easier for humans to read, and it is something that's commonly done in the reverse engineering process. So if the software detects this, that script runs, it creates a memory overload, and then basically that crashes the browser window that's in use. They also added a whole bunch of garbage code to it to make it hard to read, and they put base 64 obfuscation on it, which is where they shift it all around, and they have other tactics that are going to make this code more confusing and more difficult to understand. And of course your anti-malware is going to have more struggles trying to detect Trickbot downloads and to prevent it from running on any given machine. So it's definitely a mess. I did mention this on Tuesday, and we did talk about it on Pulse Security Weekly on Wednesday night. Basically, an old bug has come back again in the form of pkexec, which is a component of PolKit, which is pretty much in every major Linux distro and has been for 12 years. 12 years ago, this thing was actually reported, but this time they're now saying this is very likely going to start being exploited in the wild any day. Proper execution of this thing can give you full root. You can even try it yourself. We were doing it the other night, and Paul was doing it on a machine here in the studio. I did it on one of my VMs, and all of them, it worked on all of them. PolKit basically, it used to be called Policy Kit, and it's a mechanism that is a system-level mechanism which allows non-privileged processes to actually communicate with privileged processes on the system. The file itself, pkexec, can be used to run commands with elevated privileges at root. So Qualys, who reported all this, decided to call the vulnerability PwnKit, and they said they have a proof of concept that they have not released yet. And during their exploit, they were able to get full root on default installs of CentOS, Debian, Fedora, and Ubuntu, and they believe that many other Linux distros are also likely vulnerable, especially forks of any of those. The only good news here is that it's a local privilege exploit. But, I mean, considering how many of us have used Linux servers that had many, many users on them and may still be using those for web development or whatever, you know, I mean, that could be a real problem. But the article's got examples in it that you can try yourself. So, you know, jump in there, and if you've got a Linux server, you just want to set up a quick Linux box to see if it'll work. You may have to go back because the latest patch versions on Ubuntu and so have blocked that. I had an old Linux server that was just sitting out there that hadn't been updated in years. It's not actually public, and I just jumped on there and tried it, and yeah, it worked just fine. QNAP force updated, and this is very interesting to me. QNAP force updated NAS devices for their customers with new firmware, trying to stop the spread of deadbolt ransomware, which is targeting a 0-day or now I guess the 1-day in QNAP NAS devices, and it's a remote code execution attack that allows them to execute the ransomware on your NAS remotely. So according to the threat actor who is running this, there is a 0-day in QNAP devices. They are exploiting it to encrypt the devices with deadbolt. Deadbolt, if you aren't familiar with it, is a ransomware. It encrypts and then replaces all the file extensions with the term .deadbolt and replaces your HTML login page on the QNAP device with a ransom note which demands 0.03 Bitcoin if you want the key and get your data back. The Deadbolt gang has also been trying to sell the details of the 0-day for 5 Bitcoins on the dark web, and a master decryption key that will decrypt all the affected victims in the world for 50 Bitcoins. So, you know, I mean, it's like, okay, now how much would you pay? The QNAP warning went out several weeks ago, but this week they just force updated all their systems that they can reach, I guess. And I thought that was pretty interesting because apparently they pushed version 5.0.0.1891 to all machines, and they were able to do this even if you had automatic updates disabled, which really was concerning. And some boxes apparently failed because the iSCSI connections would no longer work. There is a fix for this in the article if you had that problem. But if you already got ransomware, well, I guess none of this will help you very much. But, you know, if you are using QNAP devices and you haven't been ransomwared and somehow they didn't auto-force your firmware update, you may want to go do that yourself. Apple did issue a patch this week to correct a bug in Safari that allowed for tracking you even if you had tracking turned off or strict privacy protection enabled. The bug, which was in WebKit, was issued as CVE 2022-22594, and it's found in just about everything on Apple products that has a browser or uses a browser in some way. So WebKit is a key component of the system. And, well, you know, basically everything's using this. The patch was iOS 15.3, but it also had patches for macOS, tvOS, watchOS, and Safari all being updated in this patching cycle. According to the article, this is a 0-day that is being exploited in the wild. So if you are using Apple products of pretty much any sort, you need to patch your devices now if you haven't already. And finally, apparently the Pentagon and if you don't, the Pentagon is where the Department of Defense is located in Washington, D.C. The Pentagon is looking for somebody to set up a garbage collection operation in space. Basically, since the 1950s or so, we've been shooting stuff, loads of stuff into space. I mean, lots of stuff. I mean, every time somebody flushes a space toilet, well, frozen stuff's getting ejected into space. It keeps floating around for all eternity. And that's not to mention garbage, old satellites, those rocket stages they always showed separating when the Apollo missions were flying, old golf balls. Who knows how many secret spy projects that were launched down through the years, a cat named Frankenstein, and probably somebody's lost luggage. I mean, I don't know if you know this. You probably do. But Delta V is not a nice thing. Delta V refers to the rate of change between you and another angle in space. So if you have a golf ball and they teed it off on some space mission, and the cosmonaut hit it and it's floating around out there, it may be traveling at 26,000 miles per hour. Now, if you're right there with it on the same Delta V, you're on the same angle with it, you probably are moving at 26,000 miles per hour too, so it looks like it's not really moving at all, but it actually is. Now, if you get on a different angle to that, so if you're like a new satellite or you're something else sitting up there and the Delta V angle is different, you could conceivably get hit with a golf ball moving 26,000 miles per hour and poof, that's it. And that's why railguns are so nasty. But anyway, the program is called Orbital Prime, and it will fall under, wait for it, Space Force. And in the first round, companies can get $250,000 of seed money to get started, and there was like $1.5 million in the second round, and more, I guess, to come later on. In the video about this, General David Thompson said there are more than 40,000 objects the size of a fist or larger floating around out there. And there's more than 400,000 or more, they don't even know how many there are, that are smaller objects that they cannot track. So, now's the time to build your space scow and start sweeping the skies, like Red Dwarf or something like that. Anyway, that's the wrap-up for the week of 23 January 2022. I'm Doug White. See you next week on Security Weekly News.